Hujambo community, and Aquaba. Welcome to another episode of Espresso Talk Today. I'm your host, Alma Robin, and as you know, we are diving deep into this month's theme of Black exploration as Black empowerment. Today, we are going to talk about something that's bothered me for quite a long time. The racial chaos of silence. Racial chaos doesn't always show up loudly or violently. Sometimes it operates in a deafening silence. And that silence can erase Black people and our contributions from the historical record. And that is what has been happening. This episode, as you can see, is personal for me. Last week, while in the United States, and some states were celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day, 17 states, I believe. Others still recognized Christopher Columbus. And I couldn't help but think how deeply entrenched white supremacy is still with us. And the white supremacist history telling is still with us. But let me share something a little more specific with you. Last year, and yes, I've been thinking about this incident for that long, I visited the New York City Public Library, and it had an exhibit on explorers. They had sections on people who had traveled to the North Pole. That's just one of the sections. But there was not a single mention of Matthew Henson. Now, Matthew Henson, if you don't know, if you're not familiar with him, because often he is not taught, was one of the first people, if not the first, to reach the North Pole in 1909. And yes, he was Black. I love this quote that I've heard from him, that he says, "I'm the first person to sit on top of the world." That quote from him has moved me for years. But there was no mention of Matthew Henson at that Explorers exhibit. And this is exactly what I mean when I talk about the racial chaos of silence. It's not always loud. It quietly works to write Black people and our courage and contributions out of history. Let's talk about this silence and how I'm breaking it today as I'm sipping my turmeric, cinnamon, and black pepper coffee. You know, that's something that I just love to do. But before we dive into today's topic, make sure you hit that subscribe button if you haven't already. Share this podcast with your fam, your friends, your community, everyone that's around you, because we need to share and spread this information. And let's spread this awareness and build this movement together. Now, it's your turn. Grab that espresso or tea. Tea drinkers are welcome here too. And close that door behind you. We're going to get deep and we're going to get real. And I hope that y'all are ready for this. Well, ready or not, here we go. When we think of exploration, and often we're thinking of that in the United States in October, names like Columbus, Magellan, Lewis and Clark often come to mind. They shape our understanding of what exploration means in a Eurocentric context. But there are many explorers whose stories that we've never heard, and that is not by accident. The contributions and explorations of Black explorers have long been relegated to the background of a story written by and for a white audience. And this is the racial chaos of silence. This is one manifestation of it. And I have to say that it's written by a white audience, for a white audience, but it's also written for all of us. Because we're only supposed to think about what white people have contributed to the historical record and what they have explored and their contributions. Ours get diminished, denied, overlooked, written out. And another pet peeve I've had too was, I've picked up some books when they talk about, some of the 50 greatest explorers of all time. I deliberately look through the table of contents, and if I don't see a single black name, or if I don't see a single non-white name, I don't get that book. In fact, if I only see one, I don't get that book, because that's also a distortion, and it's a manipulative distortion of history. Because then you think, there was one. There was only one. No. There have been many, many, many black and brown explorers. And to mention only one out of 50, and yes, this is true. Go look, you can find that book, is manipulation. And it's telling a Eurocentric, or I really think of it as a white supremacist history-telling exercise. You see, racial chaos, as I said, does not always scream. Sometimes it does, and we've talked about that, and we're going to keep talking about that. But racial chaos, racism, sometimes operates in a quiet but destructive silence that erases, distorts, or ignores the contributions of black and brown people. It's in this kind of hushed corner of history that many black explorers, those who dare to chart unknown territories, challenge societal norms, and expand the realms of human knowledge, and that those have been forgotten or minimized, mostly denied. This October, we are here to break that silence and to shine a light on the courageous black explorers and reclaim our history. Now, I've already mentioned him, and I don't know how much you know, but I'm going to go ahead and start with Matthew Henson, and I promise you, we're not going to end with him, and he is not the only one. There are so many black explorers and adventurers. I'm going to mention a few today, and throughout the rest of the month, I'm going to constantly mention others. But please don't think that he's the only one. But we're going to start with Matthew Henson. As I mentioned, Matthew Henson was one of the first people to reach the North Pole. He did this alongside Robert Peary in 1909. Now, Robert Peary is a name you might have heard of, and Robert Peary was a name that was mentioned at the New York City Public Library, but not Henson. But for decades, Peary's name dominated the history books, while Henson's incredible achievements were brushed aside. And this erasure, or I have to say denial even, wasn't because Henson's contributions weren't significant. It was because of the racial bias of the time, and today even, that decided whose stories were worthy of celebration and whose were not. Matthew Henson navigated treacherous ice floes. He built relationships with the Inuit people. In fact, he learned the Inuit language, and he actually even married an Inuit woman. And he was a skilled explorer in every sense of the word. He had been since he was 17 years old. He has really an incredible life. Yet his name remains in the margins of history, silenced by the racial chaos of that time and of this time, of today. But this silence does not stop with Matthew Henson. I also want to talk about Barbara Hillary. We're going to jump, a lot ahead now. I hope Barbara Hillary is a name you've heard, but if you haven't, you're going to hear it today. She did not just break boundaries. She shattered them. In her 70s, after surviving lung cancer, she became the first African-American woman to reach both the North and the South Poles. Can you imagine? I believe actually too, she was a native and a lifelong resident of Chicago. And this woman actually decided in her, 60s and 70s that she was going to, after retirement, she wasn't going to sit around and watch TV and just kind of wither away. She was going to see the world, and she decided to challenge herself. And so she went to the North and the South Poles, and yeah, she was a lung cancer survivor, and in fact she did this with only one lung. At an age when society tells us to slow down, Barbara Hillary was exploring the edges of the earth. But how many of us have heard her name? This is the racial chaos that works quietly to keep Black excellence buried under societal neglect. Even a step further, under racism. I think this is a good time to take a breather break. So that's what we're going to do now. And this is a lot of information. Racial chaos, the silence of racial chaos, Barbara Hillary, Matthew Henson. I need to take a breath. And I want you to as well. I'll see you in a minute. Aquaba back, community. I hope you enjoyed your breather break. I took a moment just to breathe. And it's amazing how much one can accomplish and feel and experience by just sitting and breathing for a minute. Now, I want to continue highlighting the stories of Black explorers who challenged the boundaries society imposed on them. And makes me think about all the boundaries that society imposes on us. We'll get to that in a minute. Okay, our next explorer, Sophie Dannenberg. In 2006, Sophie Dannenberg, I hope that's a name that's familiar to you because she's still with us, she's still active, and she's still around. She became the first African-American woman to summit Mount Everest. And that peak symbolizes the ultimate challenge. Her accomplishment was monumental, not just for the climbing world, but also for the broader narrative of what it means to be a Black woman daring to explore spaces where we're often told we don't belong. Does that sound familiar? Many times in outdoor spaces, and certainly in some of those really challenging, extreme spaces, Black people are told we don't belong there. And we feel that we don't belong. And things are set up so that we can't experience them. But Sophie Dannenberg, she changed that narrative. And she not only said that I do belong, she went there. But her story, too, has faced much of the same kind of erasure and denial that we see so often. And it's a silence that we have to confront and dismantle. Because, when the avatar, the vision that I get of a person going up Everest isn't a young Black woman. Actually, I think she's, Black and Asian woman, Japanese. But it's of a white man. And that vision is changing. But exploration isn't only about scaling mountains, not to deny any of that. That's one thing. Or reaching poles. And I'm certainly not diminishing that at all. Some of the most powerful exploration happens in the realms of culture, science, and imagination. Oh boy, it's getting deep here. It's getting serious. Told you we were going to get real and get deep. Let's talk about Jean-Michel Basquiat and Octavia Butler. Basquiat explored the complexities of Black identity, history, and politics through his art. This challenged the Eurocentric dominance of the art world. Well, we know how, I've taken a lot of art classes and I've gone to a lot of museums and they say some of the finest art, and we know what that looks like. That's very Eurocentric. Well, Jean-Michel, he broke that barrier. And he was an explorer in every sense of the word, charting new territories of what it meant to be Black in America and beyond. And if you see his paintings and you see his work, you'll see how he challenged the narrative of what, fine art and protest art and, vision and creativity can look like. And then, by the way, I'm going to put up some of his paintings, just pictures of them, some of my favorites on the website. So if you're not familiar with Jean-Michel Basquiat, you can go look at some of his paintings in the blog section of the Espresso Talk Today website. Okay, yes, then there's Octavia Butler, who carved out a space for Black voices in genres that have often ignored us, or said we don't belong there. Through her works in science fiction and Afro-futurism, she imagined futures where Black people were central to the narrative, where our voices and experiences weren't just included, but were necessary. These are places where we were centered. Our culture was centered. Her exploration of the Black experience through these futuristic landscapes was groundbreaking. I'm actually reading Parable of the Sowers again. And I tell you, it has me just gripped. And I've read Kindred, and I'm going to head on and read Parable of the Talents again, too. And, when I see how we are centered, our stories are centered, our experiences, our history, our culture is centered, it's amazing, and it's almost overwhelming. And if you want to find some of those books, they're also on the website too. So I just want to mention those because, yes, we can challenge ourselves physically, at physical explorations, and those are amazing and those are important. And we've been in those spaces. We are in those spaces. But there's also this inner exploration of the creativity and vision, that can envision a world where Black people are again centered. And this has often been written out too. This has often been said that, when we look at the future, we're seeing white people, and of course Black people will be there in the future, but we're seeing Black people and Black voices and Black culture centered. But I have to admit, and I've seen this, the denial of Black explorers is not random. None of this is random. I don't believe in coincidences. It is deeply rooted in how the history has been shaped and written. The dominance of white narratives means that who gets to be remembered and valued is often decided by those in power, and for centuries that power has excluded us. Racial bias dictated whose achievements were celebrated and whose were erased. The act of writing Black explorers out of history is an example of how racism quietly shapes the world we live in. It chips away at it until it is just the history of a very narrow group of people. And their history should be told, absolutely. But so should ours, because it is there. Our contributions, our courage, our triumphs, they've been hidden, they've been ignored, and they've been deliberately silenced. This is the racial chaos of historical silence. And it has affected the historical narrative. When our history is written by those who sought to minimize or erase our contributions, then Black explorers like Matthew Henson, Barbara Hillary, Sophie Dannenberg, and others get pushed into the shadows. I think this is another time for a breather break. Then we're going to wind it down. I've almost finished my espresso, but I think it's a good idea to take a breather break here because we're getting deep and we're getting real. So I will see you in a minute. Don't give up on me now. Welcome back, community, and Asante Sana for staying in the building with me today. This is Alma Robin, and we are discussing the erasure, the denial of Black explorers and adventurers in history. But it's not just in history, how it's still happening today. Now, as we're bringing this conversation to a close, as I said, I've almost finished my espresso. Let's discuss how this silence continues today. That's true. The racial chaos of silence is not just a thing of the past. It continues today in how our contributions are marginalized or forgotten in modern contexts, just like how Matthew Henson was excluded from the New York City Public Library's exhibit on explorers that I visited. That is a major library, and it was a large exhibit, and it was a very in-depth exhibit, and yet it did not mention Matthew Henson. Yes, it mentioned Robert Perry, and it mentioned, I forgot his name, a Norwegian fellow who also went to the North Pole, but excluded Matthew Henson. And in fact, it did not mention any Black explorers or adventurers in that entire exhibit. So what's the subtle message? The message is that there weren't any, that we were not in that realm. We have not been explorers. And it wasn't shouted at. It didn't say, there wasn't a sign up there saying Black people have not been explorers. No. Well, yes, but in a different way. But what it did was it just erased us from the history of exploration. That's subtle, that's insidious, and that is what's been happening. And that's why, we believe that there haven't been really any Black explorers. And this is also, while this happened at the public library, New York City Public Library, we can see the same exclusion in education systems, media representation, and even in celebrations, holidays like Columbus Day, which continues to be recognized in many states despite its clear ties to colonialism and white supremacy, and that Columbus didn't do what they're claiming he did. That is just false history. Okay, so we have to be very vigilant of that because, I've been all through, I've had a lot of schooling, a lot of education, been law school and beyond, and I was a history major, and I never heard the word Matthew Henson in any of my classes. So Black people are still being written out of the narrative in ways that are subtle and insidious. And that's why it's so incredibly important for us to reclaim and remember these stories and tell these stories and demand that not only we can tell the stories, but we have to demand that others tell them too. That in the educational system, that should be an integral part. That in the media, in television, in other spaces like libraries, these stories need to be told. And if we don't actively challenge this silence, then it will persist and we will be erased in history, continue to be erased in history. So, how can reclaiming these stories inspire us to challenge societal limitations? And that's the thing. That's why they've been erased, too. One of the reasons. Because, when we see what Black people are doing, we are inspired. We're forever changed. When Black kids see that, wow, Matthew Henson claiming, I'm the first person to sit on top of the world. Well, that Black child knows and that there's nothing that he or she or that they can't do. When they know about what Sophie Dannenberg has done, and recently, when we know what Barbara Hillary, has accomplished, and when we start looking at and reading Octavia Butler and seeing that Jean-Michel Basquiat, who wasn't formally educated but created incredible art, when we see that and we know this is what Black people are doing, we're forever changed. The narrative is forever changed. When we reclaim these stories, whether it's the bravery of Matthew Henson or the resilience of Barbara Hillary or the visionary power of Octavia Butler, we're not just acknowledging the past. We are drawing strength from it. We're reminding ourselves that Black people have always been explorers, adventurers, and creators of new paths forward. And by reclaiming these stories, we reclaim our power and we recenter ourselves. We recenter our place in history and in, the present narrative. And this empowers us to see beyond the limitations society places on us. It challenges the narratives that tell us we can't explore certain spaces, whether those spaces are physical, intellectual, that's right, or cultural. So my call to action today is this. Start by sharing these stories. Talk about these explorers with your family and your friends and in your communities. Challenge the silence by keeping these stories alive. And most importantly, take these stories as a reminder that if you must doubt something, doubt your limits. So, that's right. You know what? Actually, I'm going to repeat that because we're often made to doubt ourselves. So, if you're going to doubt something, doubt your limits. That is all for today, and I finished my espresso, and I know that was a lot, but I promise you that these few stories that I shared today are only the very tip of the iceberg when it comes to Black explorers and Black exploration. And I really do have a lot more stories to tell. Wow. Well, have you heard of Stephen Bishop? Okay, I'm going to get to him. Not today, but soon. So please stay tuned because his story is incredible. He was formerly enslaved, and he didn't go upwards, or he didn't go to any of the poles. He did cave exploration. Let me tell you, that's deep. And sorry for the pun, but it really is. But the stories I've told today are just the tip of the iceberg when it comes also to how white supremacists will deny and destroy our history, our stories, and our contributions. They would deny our very presence and existence if they could. We won't let them, but they're going to keep trying. Asante Sana for joining me today on Espresso Talk Today. And if you found this episode meaningful, and I really hope you did, please share it with your friends and family. And I encourage you to share these stories, explore new horizons, and challenge the silence that writes us out of history. As I said, there are many more stories, and I'm going to continue to share them. And we'll also discuss how to bring out and honor the explorer and adventurer in you. That's right. Yes, there is an explorer and adventurer in you too, and it's just waiting to get out. Or perhaps your explorer and adventurer is already on the loose, and that's great. And I definitely want to hear your story. You can share your thoughts, your stories, and adventures and explorations in the comments wherever you listen to Espresso Talk Today. Or you can, DM me, direct message me on Instagram at Ama Robin L. That's AMA underscore ROBIN underscore the letter L. And you just might want to come on this show and share it directly with my audience. No pressure, but I always love to hear a good story, and I love to meet explorers and adventurers. And please remember the Believe Black People hashtag. Presenting our history of Black explorers and Black exploration and your stories in exploration uplifts and strengthens all of us. And this is how we hashtag Believe Black People. And telling the truth about our history that has been, how that's been systematically denied in other ways is also important. And we encourage people to hashtag Believe Black People and how our stories have been erased and denied. I hope that you'll also go look up the Believe Black People on Instagram and get to know me there too. Because I'm telling you, there is so much that's been denied to us. And when we discuss this, people often say that's not true because that wouldn't happen. That's why I started the hashtag Believe Black People, because that's where we're going to start to get the truth. This is Amma Robin reminding you that if you must doubt something, doubt your limits. And remember, now more than ever, strength, soul, and reparations. Ashe, community.